So when this other Mars-sized object hits it, it hits it so perfectly and so hard that most of that atmosphere, that thick atmosphere, explodes off of this proto-Earth and gives us the atmosphere we have now where we can breathe, which is nuts.
Wait a second. So Eric Metaxas thinks that when the moon formed, the atmosphere exploded off of the Earth and then reformed into the modern atmosphere that we have. What the fuck is this shit? Well, if y'all want to fuck around and find out what Eric Metaxas is talking about, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Although today we're not really tackling an apologist, but just a general dipshit. Today we're going to be talking about some of the misinformation contained within Eric Metaxas's book called Is Atheism Dead? Considering that atheism was never alive to begin with, no, it's not dead. But also, it's not dead in any other kind of metaphorical sense that you could be meaning. He recently did an interview with Sean McDowell.
I guess you'll recognize him as best-selling author, radio show, TV host, Eric Metaxas, who has a new book out called Is Atheism Dead? Eric, thanks for coming on and talking about your new book.
Oh, this little thing? It's kind of funny, Sean, because I never thought I would write about anything like this. I don't normally kind of debate atheists or anything like that.
Well, he does have one thing right. Normally, he doesn't cover this kind of shit. Normally, he's out there supporting shitheads like Greg Locke. Also suggesting that people shouldn't be vaccinated.
The bottom line is, questions come up about the vaccine. People say, this is experimental. I've watched this pandemic roll out, and I'm not afraid of getting it. My kids aren't afraid of getting it. This is not a big deal for us. I'm not going to put some experimental thing in my system when we literally don't know what could happen. So no. I'm not going to do this. So then you have people saying, oh, no, you must do it. The government says you must do it. And I think, again, Americans need to understand, if the government or everybody is telling you you have to do something, we don't have dissent, no dissent, you need to understand that's not the American way, folks. And if only to be a rebel, you need to say, I'm not going to do that.
While on the side, he's pushing for a theocratic government.
A true Christian says faith is free. Belief in Jesus can never be coerced. It is a gift from God. So if maniacal Christians took control of this country, they would make it safe for everybody else to be a part of this country. So do not fear theocracy, folks. That is a chimera. That is nonsense, a mirage.
Other things that he does publicly is mentally masturbating over the idea that Trump will oust Biden.
I have to say that I'm very encouraged. He's going to be back, folks. You hear me? He's going to be back because the election was a fraudulent election. You may not have heard that before, but the evidence is increasingly clear. It's going to come out. Oh, you're crazy, they say. Yeah, well, you stay tuned. You stay tuned to this crazy show, and you'll see that there's no possibility that the doddering jackanapes known as Joe Biden was elected by the American people. And here's the key. You maybe didn't know this. The American people choose our leaders. That's right. The deep state and the criminals who steal votes and who play that game, they don't get to choose the leaders. We, the people, get to choose. And we, the people, chose Trump twice.
And claiming that the Bible is the source of the abolition movement.
The only reason that we know racism is wrong is because of the Bible.
Or just outright sucker punching people in the face and then awkwardly running backwards.
Oh! No, you don't have to do that.
You just attacked me, bro. That's a felony. You just attacked me, bro. That's a felony. You just attacked me, bro. That's a felony.
Of Of course, Sean comes with his own issues, considering that he's about to be teaching a class on how to subvertly disenfranchise LGBTQ persons in an attempt to praise God. You're right. This is wildly different from the normal dipshit things that Eric Metaxas does.
And my thesis in this book is that the culture around that time felt like, science has kind of pushed God out. We talk about the God of the gaps. And reasonable people, intelligent people, educated people don't believe in God. They believe that it's part of kind of the childhood of mankind, and we've sort of progressed beyond that. And the more we learn from science, the less room we have for these primitive beliefs.
When has science ever pushed God out of anything? Guess what he could be meaning is that through scientific endeavors, we've been able to solidly say God did not do these things. These things occurred naturally with no need of a supernatural entity to accomplish them. But science hasn't killed God. Of course, you gotta exist first in order to be killed, but the context of this segment, and I guess the context of the book in general, is a 1966 Time magazine cover that says, "Is God dead?" And it appears in this interview that he's claiming that God was effectively dead after 1966. Again, what the fuck is he talking about? Now, religion in this country has been on a slow decline, mainly in Protestantism. The Catholics have remained pretty steady in their numbers since like the 1940s, so it's really just been Protestantism that has been on the decline in the United States. But that's pretty far away from God being dead in this country, or at least dead enough of the population to speak of it as a general fact about the United States. Not even in the scientific community was God dead.
Evidence has been coming in rather steadily and ultimately rather overwhelmingly from science that points to the existence of a creator.
What evidence? Got evidence, motherfucker? Then show it. I haven't seen a single scientific study or paper that has pointed directly to God. Well, at least one that hasn't come directly from some kind of theological institution like Answers in Genesis or the Creation Research Institute. Now I'm gonna guess, hear me out now, I don't think that he's gonna mention even one study.
And I find it funny because I thought nobody got that memo. We're still living in a world like 1966 where everybody acts as though most of the evidence is pointing away from God. But the science obviously has gotten better and better and better since 1966. And rather than pushing God out more and more quickly, it has pointed more and more to the idea that it's not possible that we got here through random forces, through naturalistic forces.
I love the ambiguous reference to science pointing to God. My guess is that Eric is just talking about his faulty understanding of whatever he thinks science is saying. And by the way, what studies is he talking about? We don't fucking know! Science literally can't prove anything outside of nature, so I don't know what in the fuck he could be talking about here. Science does continuously give us answers to questions that we once answered with, God did it! Science has done this so much that it would take an immense amount of evidence in order to overcome that prior probability. In this interview, Eric then goes on to have this long discussion on the origins of the scientific theory of the inflation of the universe. Except he paints it as this grand discovery for God, rather than the fact that science has further reduced the gap in which God resides. As we saw before, Eric Metaxas has a habit of twisting the truth to meet his needs.
Well, I love it. So the first piece of evidence you talk about, you mentioned, is the Big Bang. The origin of the universe points towards a cause outside of the universe. Then you talk about the fine-tuning, which are certain characteristics within the universe. And I appreciate that you make a distinction between, say, the fine-tuning of, say, our location in the galaxy, the right age, certain characteristics of water. But then you talk about these physical constants, which were established really at the beginning of the universe and can be represented in numbers. and the slightest change in the universe would be inhospitable to life. So
This is just wrong. We don't know what conditions exactly would be inhospitable to all life. We know what conditions would be inhospitable to our form of life, but that doesn't mean that our form of life is the gold standard for all life that exists. It's really myopic to assume that we are the standard for all life. But also, another thing to note is that we have found organisms that were surviving in environments that we thought were inhospitable to life. So as far as we know, there is no slight change that would make life impossible. He may also be talking about the inflation of the universe and the quote-unquote fine-tuning of this universe that makes it habitable for life. Again, we don't know what conditions would allow for life to arise in a different universe with different constants. And if the constants can change in another universe, then the underlying equations that use those constants would also change to compensate for those changes. Basically, both Sean McDowell and Eric Metaxas are talking out of their ass when they discuss this topic.
But one of the things that I love is you talk about, for example, just like our moon. Like how amazing our moon is.
The stuff about the moon, you think, well, how come I didn't learn about this in school? Or why aren't people talking about this? This is like mind-blowing information. But we kind of act like, yeah, everything's normal. There's no God. You know?
Who acts this way exactly? When I was a kid, everybody believed in God. Nobody in my vicinity ever questioned whether or not God existed. And the moon was not even on my radar as something that points to the existence of God. I only encountered this notion when I first started looking into creationism. So no, there wasn't a significant portion of the US population in 1966 that were atheists. Hell, we're not even a significant portion of the US population now. Sure, there are a lot more of us, but not enough to speak of us like he does in this section.
I talk about, for example, people argue about evolution. What happens? How did evolution happen? Did it happen? Do we believe in punctuated evolution? Stephen Jay Gould. Do we believe in theistic evolution? Do we believe in Darwinian evolution, blind evolution? What do we think happened once you got life? No one ever talks about, wait a minute, forget that. How did you get life in the first place? How did the first cell emerge? People don't ask that question. We can come to that later, but people also don't ask the question, how did the moon get there? How'd that happen? What does science say?
Everyone asks this question about life. Maybe he's talking about just everyday Christians and how they don't question things at all. Even so, whenever I talk to somebody about why I'm an atheist, one of the first things they always bring up is, if God don't exist, then how come life began? It's the most fundamental question that atheists get. So I don't know why he's acting like nobody asks this question. People just don't like the answers that we have for them. His main point in this particular section is how the moon proves that God exists. And from this point, Eric goes on to meticulously explain his understanding of what the reigning scientific hypothesis is on how the moon formed. This would be the giant impact hypothesis. Basically, there was this small protoplanet called Theia, although Eric thinks that Earth was once called Theia and not the protoplanet that slammed into Earth. It just goes to show that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Anyways, this protoplanet then slammed into the Earth and ejected a little bit of material from both Theia, the protoplanet, and Earth into an orbit around the Earth, and that eventually all came together, coalesced into the moon. Now, we know that the Earth and the moon are connected in some kind of way because the chemical composition of both the Earth and the moon are very similar. Now, the chemical composition of the moon suggests that this impact happened prior to a lot of water being on the Earth, and while the surface was still pretty hot. Alas, there are other hypotheses, though. One hypothesis is that the Earth snatched up an object that was floating by, and that object became the moon. One big problem with this hypothesis, though, is that it doesn't explain the chemical composition of the moon being eerily similar to the Earth's. Another hypothesis is that multiple asteroid and meteorite strikes to the surface of the Earth while it was still forming ejected enough material that it eventually coalesced into the moon. And another hypothesis says that both the Earth and the moon formed at the exact same time, but again, there are problems with this hypothesis. My point is that there are a lot of ideas about how the moon would have formed. It doesn't necessarily have to be the giant impact hypothesis, but that is the most popular hypothesis among scientists today. And the key point is that none of these hypotheses include God did it.
And when you think of two planet-sized things, two planets effectively colliding perfectly, the more you know about science, the more you know this doesn't happen.
What in the fuck does he mean by effectively colliding perfectly? Because I don't think that there was anything perfect about the collision between the Earth and the protoplanet Theia. Also, saying that planets don't collide with each other is just wrong. We know that collisions between planets can and do happen. We know that collisions between planets in orbit around the sun are extremely rare and happen in a newly developing solar system, but they do happen. You see, in the early stages of the formation of a solar system, what you have are all these dust particles. And these dust particles are attracted to one another through the static forces. And once these dust balls have gained enough mass to effectively start attracting, other dust balls with gravity, that's when they start getting bigger and bigger. Well, if two protoplanets were able to form around a sun and their elliptical paths would intersect at some point in their orbit around the sun, then it's very probable that they will eventually collide into one. This is perfectly reasonable, and nothing precludes it from happening in the formation of a solar system.
Planets are so far away from each other, and stars, and that entire galaxies can pass through each other. The amount of space is vast. So the idea of two things colliding, much less colliding perfectly, almost never happens.
In the context of the Earth and Moon forming, this section literally makes no sense. When taken in the proper context, it's very easy to get a situation that resulted in the formation of our Moon. Bringing up the vast distances between planets that have already settled into their orbit around their star is asinine.
And you think, that's what science says happened. And when you start looking at that, you start saying, this is wild. So you mean it was like an incredibly perfectly calibrated collision. And if it hadn't happened exactly as it happened, and this is the punchline, there would be no life on Earth. If that hadn't happened, there's no life on Earth.
Like I stated before, there are many ways in which our moon could have formed. So no, it doesn't take a perfectly calibrated event in order to result in our moon. Earth isn't even the best place for life to arise. Currently, we've been able to identify 24 super habitable planets among the 4,000 exoplanets that we know of. Applying this notion of being perfectly calibrated is quite ridiculous when you're talking about our Earth and Moon.
And you think, well, so it's kind of nice that happened, isn't it? And then you start looking at it's kind of like shooting two BBs across the room and they have to collide perfectly. You'd say, what are the odds of that?
Sounds more like a Dude Perfect video than an argument for God. Just because something seems unlikely to happen doesn't mean that it can't happen. Take his BB gun example. If you were to place billions upon billions of BB guns all pointing in random ass directions, and you fired them all at once, there is a non-zero probability that at least two of those BB guns are going to be pointed with a trajectory that would cause their BBs to collide into one another. And that's just how probability works.
If this had not happened exactly as it happened, for many reasons, there's not a chance, any chance that life would exist on Earth. For one thing, this proto-Earth was too small to have any kind of atmosphere that would really work. It had the atmosphere it had was so thick and so viscous that it would be like trying to breathe sand. There's just no way that anything could form there.
The fact that there are multiple ways in which our moon could have formed, or moons in general do form, refutes all of the bullshit he just said about how perfect the situation was for our moon. And life first evolved in the water, so they wouldn't have been on the surface of the Earth to breathe whatever atmosphere was there. The atmosphere that allowed life to move from water to the land didn't come until much later.
If this had not happened exactly as it happened, for many reasons, there's not a chance, any chance that life would exist on Earth. For one thing, this proto-Earth was too small to have any kind of atmosphere that would really work. It had the atmosphere it had was so thick and so viscous that it would be like trying to breathe sand. There's just no way that anything could form there. So when this other Mars-sized object hits it, it hits it so perfectly and so hard that most of that atmosphere, that thick atmosphere, explodes off of this proto-Earth and gives us the atmosphere we have now where we can breathe, which is nuts.
Did this motherfucker really just say that the collision between our Earth and Thea caused our atmosphere to explode off of the Earth and then somehow replace that atmosphere with our current atmosphere so that life could arise? Whew, that's a new dumb fucking idea. Now, one thing he does get right is that the early atmosphere on the Earth was inhospitable to our form of life. But that's why life first developed in water. When life eventually evolved to the point where it had a lot of organisms that were churning out a lot of oxygen and created this, what we call the Great Oxidation Event, that changed our atmosphere into something that could be breathed by our form of life. But the point is that the atmosphere never exploded off of the Earth. When the collision happened, yeah, some atmosphere was lost and the chemical composition of the atmosphere was changed. But that is not exploding off of the Earth. I don't know why he would think that, other than he's a goddamn idiot.
And if the moon hadn't formed exactly as it hadn't given enough mass to the Earth to create the planet we have now, which makes life possible, and if the moon weren't exactly where it is, if we had no moon, for other reasons, there's no life on Earth.
Simply put, we have no idea of the full range of conditions that would allow life to arise in one form or another. Moons are a pretty common occurrence in the universe, so I really don't understand why he thinks that's such a special thing. And Eric suggesting that things have to work out extremely perfectly in order for life to arise ignores the fact that there's a wide range of conditions that would allow life to arise. And that's just from shit that we know. If the moon didn't form in the way that the giant impact hypothesis states, or if it formed in another different way, or let's just say the moon didn't even form at all, yes, our planet would be different. It could potentially not have given rise to life. Everything would be different. The point is that playing this game of what if this happens doesn't really get us anywhere in the conversation.
And you start thinking, the more I look into this, the more it looks like the most highly engineered thing imaginable. It makes landing on the moon look like child's play. This is just crazy stuff.
The fact that super habitable planets exist prove that this Earth is not highly engineered. It kind of seems like the Earth just sort of came together naturally, and with the wide range of attributes and conditions that would allow life to arise, probabilistically it would have arisen at some point. Hell, it seems like there are better circumstances for life to arise on other planets. Why did God choose to put us on this hellscape rather than one of the planets that it would be easier to survive on? Kind of makes God look like a dick, doesn't it?
If it were not the exact size it is, if it were not as far away as it is, we could not have life on Earth. And you think, why? What does it have to do with anything? The wobble of the Earth was stabilized because of the huge size of the moon. There are all kinds of things. I mean, it's obvious.
Yes, if our planet developed differently, then it would be a different planet. And it may or may not support life. The point is that playing this what if game is not getting us anywhere, so Eric just needs to stop with that bullshit. And another thing is the fact that he doesn't know what conditions will and won't support life. It seems like he's ad hoc assuming that our form of life is the only form of life that could exist. He's ad hoc assuming that the way that the Earth developed and its attributes and its conditions is the only way for a habitable planet to exist. But we know that that's not true.
How do you rule out chance given how big the universe is and how much time it is, as an explanation that's equivalent or better than the divine God hypothesis?
It's not even close. Again, I think if you're intellectually honest, you're stuck. There's not enough time for this kind of thing to happen more than once. The level, it's almost like saying, you know, there are 300 dials on a wall and every one of them is calibrated perfectly. And you go, well, what's the big deal? The big deal is if any one of the 300 dials were off by a quarter of an inch, the whole thing can't exist.
Okay. Eric has a bachelor's degree in English from Yale University. He's also not citing anybody on this bullshit point that there's not enough time for something to happen. Now, I don't have a statistics degree, but engineering definitely requires a lot of math. I also know I'm not all that great with words, because people that are generally good with words are also not all that great at math. I don't know if anybody's experienced things differently than me, but that has been my general experience. Eric Metaxas not understanding how probability works just further reinforces this trend that I've experienced. Considering the fact that there's about 21.6 sextillion planets in the known universe and 13.8 billion years with which those fuckers have had to form, there's definitely a shit ton of habitable planets. Let's say that the probability that a habitable planet would form is 1 in a billion billion. I'm gonna assume that means 1 to the 10 to the negative 18%. That would still leave us with over 21 million habitable planets in the known universe. Kinda seems to me, talking from a probability and statistics standpoint, while the formation of a habitable planet is rare and unlikely, they still definitely form. Well, heathens, that's going to be it for me today. All in all, I'm very unimpressed with this first look at Eric Metaxas' book. I don't think that I'll be getting it. It just seems like it's an ego-stroking nightmare. So I don't even think that I'm going to bother picking it up. And I would not suggest you go out and buy it. Eric seems to have this habit of twisting facts and information around in order to push the narrative that he wants to push. This is the same for all conspiracy theorists out there, which I'm not saying that he's a conspiracy theorist, but the fact that he thinks that Trump is going to oust Biden and regain control of the United States, and he really wants a theocracy to take over and everything. I feel like there's substantial amount of evidence to say, yeah, he's kind of a conspiracy-laden fuck. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. Please go down below. Let me know what you think about Eric Metaxas and his very bad understanding of how our moon formed, or that God even exists. I'd love to know what you guys think. So go down there, let me know in the comments. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.